I'd like to spend a little bit of time teasing apart the question, when does a thought reflect upon you as a person? Or maybe, when do you become responsible for a thought? Because I think it's really a significant experience that people have, that they're cruising along through their life, they get ambushed by some heinous, awful thought. And then immediately following that, there's recriminations. Oh, I'm a bad person. Oh, this is terrible. Why would I think something like that? That's unhelpful. But it speaks to a misunderstanding of how thoughts happen and how they relate to the course of our lives as human beings. So I want to dig at that a little bit. So, upfront answer to that question. A thought reflects something about you as a person if you entertain it. So anything that you pay attention to will persist in your mind. That's just the way that it works. You can think of your attention as like sunlight for a little plant, right? If you're constantly allowing sunlight to get onto a plant, it's going to grow and flourish. And if you block the sun out, then it's going to wither and die. That's how things work inside of your mind. So if you can cut off access to attention, then a given sort of thought will over time tend to diminish. It will wither, it will die off. So the only things that are going to persist and are going to present themselves urgently before your conscious awareness are in the long run going to be the things that you are paying attention to. And you may be paying attention to things that are awful, not because you want them to be part of your life, but because they're so awful that it's distressing and it's difficult to look away from something that is stressing you out. So those sorts of thoughts can get reinforced due to a failing of the way that our organism is set up as an information processing system. That stuff that is upsetting tends to command our attention, and because it commands our attention, it grows and persists within our mind. We get into these feedback loops where unpleasant cognition becomes more and more likely to arise in the future because it was unpleasant to us in the past. So because this thought was so horrifying to me, it was so against what I conceive of myself, it remains, it persists, it becomes a more significant part of my experience. So those thoughts that you entertain are the ones that say something about you. They may not say what you think at first glance, and that's because you're probably thinking about how thinking works wrong. There's a label that's really helpful for these things that I've encountered more and more, and I'm very delighted to see that people are talking about it more and more. It's the idea of intrusive thoughts. It comes up in a lot of discussions around mental health because people with certain mental health conditions will be more susceptible to repeating loops of unpleasant cognition. And so we have this, we have this label, yay, awesome, and because we have a label for it, because it's separate conceptually from the normal stream of thoughts, we have the ability to distance the person experiencing the intrusive thought from the intrusive thought. This may be happening in your head, but it's not necessarily about you, which is a really, really important distinction to be able to make if you want to manage these things in a constructive way. But as useful as that category is, as helpful and awesome as that category is, I think the label is not very good, because the idea of an intrusive thought, a thought which is intruding, necessarily implies the idea of a non-intrusive thought. And I don't think that that's a binary that is actually helpful or reflects the reality of human cognition. I would contend that all thoughts are intrusive, in that there isn't like some normal process by which your thoughts arise and then something else from a different process intrudes upon that. And I think that the way that our language describes human cognitive activity is really unhelpful and creates that image for people, because we say things like, I'm thinking about, and it makes it sound like a doing, the process of thinking. But most of thinking is actually passive. Like, the actual generation of thoughts happens with or without your intent. So an easy way to prove that to yourself, Just go sit down somewhere for 5 minutes and resolve to not think. So you sit down and you say, I'm going to do no thinking for the next 5 minutes. And a whole bunch of thinking happens anyway. Tons and tons and tons of thoughts will arise. It's impossible not to think. And then they're not some special thoughts. They're not like some, oh, the brain is idle, so something else is going to happen thoughts. It will be the exact same thoughts. The exact thoughts that you have every day of your life will continue going on despite the fact that you are fully intending not to do that, which means you were never doing it in the first place. There isn't a doing there in the generation of thoughts. What there is a doing of is the cultivation of thoughts. A whole bunch of thoughts arise in every moment, but you only have a narrow band of attention. You need to move that attention around to the subset of thoughts in a given moment arising that are useful, constructive, fruitful for you, that support your experience of well-being. But all of the thoughts that are available to you in a given moment, and it's a space that's much larger than the thoughts that you actually pay attention to, are intruding upon your consciousness. You're chilling there and you're aware of some subset of the universe, and then boop, 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 in pop all of these little chunks of cognition. And some subset of them are sufficiently attention grabbing that they are able to command some of your cognitive resources. Or if you are paying attention, if you're especially somebody who has trained to control their cognitive resources, you can look at all of this stuff pop, 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 and go, oh, what's good here? What's available? What's happening? What would I like to have right now? What supports my well-being? But that's the only doing that's available to you. You can either fail to make a choice, at which point whatever thought is most naturally, intrinsically attention arresting will grab your attention and then grow into whatever it grows into. Or you can make the choice to consciously allocate your attention, and then whatever you choose will grow into whatever it leads to. So that's the way that thinking is actually working. Once you're aware of that, and once you're trained in that, once you have taken the steps to begin to develop the ability to direct your attention so that you can make choices about that, then at that point, what you experience can sort of begin to say something about you, in that if you're experiencing a lot of really heinous, unpleasant cognition and you continue to pay attention to it, despite the fact that you know that paying attention to it makes it more likely to persist, that says that you're not doing a great job in making healthy choices around what you're paying attention to. That's kind of all it says. And if you are somebody who's at the beginning of that journey of learning to command your attention and actually allocate it in a way that is healthy to you, and especially if you're a young person, it doesn't actually say anything other than you may have had an unfortunate history or been exposed to unpleasant things in the past, because your brain as an information processing system is not well set up. You can think of it as a naive networked computer. Naive in the sense that it doesn't have a security model. It just assumes any code that it encounters is safe to execute. And networked in that it encounters, it makes connections with other computers and can exchange data and code. That's what we're doing right now. I am using one of the world's oldest programming languages to reprogram your brain. Hopefully not too severely. But what that means is that over the course of your life, you will just have all of this information coming in, and it's making changes to the way that your brain works as an information processing system. Every piece of language that you hear affects the future process of the generation of your thoughts. And you don't have any ability for a significant portion of your life to do anything about that, because It takes about 25 years for our brain to fully cook, for all the modules to come online, at which point you actually have all the regulatory hardware in place that you could consciously, volitionally start making choices about what sort of thoughts you want to have present in your mind. And you can then begin directing your attention to nourish the sorts of thoughts that are constructive and healthy for you, and then keep that attention away from the sorts of unpleasant thoughts that have made their way into your mind during the 25 years of your childhood and early adulthood, where you didn't really have the full kit available to manage what's going on in here. Until you reach that point, what's happening in here doesn't say anything about you. It just says something about your history, but that's different from your identity. So I wanted to just share a little bit about my personal experience of these sorts of notions. So when I was a teenager and early adult, I started having really severe experiences of depression, and depression makes suicidal cognition way more appealing, like so much more appealing, right? So when I was a wee child, like little tiny child, I climbed everything I could get my hands on. Some of my earliest memories are being yelled at for being on top of roofs, or being way up in trees. And by the time I was sort of a late teenager, I had a really strong fear of heights develop. And it wasn't necessarily that I was afraid of the consequences of falling off of stuff. I've fallen off of so much stuff in my life. I'm fine with it. But this constant loop of suicidal ideation was so frequent and intense that I was not sure that if I went up somewhere high that I could stop myself from throwing myself off of it and committing suicide. Like, that was literally a very real fear in my life, is that if I put myself in a situation where I am one action away from death, I will probably die, just because that loop of ideation will become so powerful that it will actually be able to generate behavior. And I still experience depression regularly. But because I was very, blessed and fortunate to have the time, space, and mentorship and encouragement in my life to spend a lot of time working on learning how to control where my attention goes. And then I had the opportunity to live in a monastic community and all that sort of stuff, where that's really your only job. If you're at a monastery, you wash dishes and you think about how your mind works. I was able to learn how to direct my attention away from that suicidal ideation, even when it was really, really appealing, even when it was exactly where my attention wanted to go. Like, oh, nope. Okay. Hello again. Suicidal thoughts. I see you. I see you there. We're going over here. And we're going to go over to this little garden of healthy, constructive thoughts that I have cultivated just for this occasion. Just for the moment when I'm lethargic and melancholy and everything seems terrible, and there are all of these thoughts that are just saying everybody hates you, you should just kill yourself, on repeat all day. Okay, I can tell that that's happening. I'm aware that that's happening. I'm acknowledging that that's happening. But I also am going to focus on the fact that I know that that doesn't mean anything about me. That I have a clear conception of who I am, what I'm doing in life, and what I want to have persist in my mind. I'm going to double down on focusing on that right now. And, early days, that was just, I had a couple of lines from the Platform Sutra of Wei-Ning that I would just chant on loop. And if I was somewhere that I couldn't actually chant, I would just focus on it and just repeat these 3 lines in my mind. I think they're the formless vows, if I remember correctly. And image that I had of what I was doing is that I was a person who was like shipwrecked and I was just hanging on to rocks in a storm. And, you know, at some point, hopefully the storm will pass and I can swim to shore. But for now, the only thing that I can do is hold on to this rock. And, you know, hold on to the rock. And the storm would pass. I would make it to the shore. And my experience, fortunately, with depression is periodic. So it gets intense and then it lets up for a little bit, and then it gets intense and then it lets up for a little bit. So the storm does pass. And over time, what happened was the allure of all of the sorts of cognition that become more compelling when I'm depressed faded. So the bad thoughts are not gone. They're all in here. The suicidal ideation is not gone. I've just turned it into a joke at this point. Yeah, you should go kill yourself. I'll probably die tomorrow anyway. You know, I don't have a negative response because I don't believe that that thought has anything to do with me. It's just one of the many thoughts that has lodged itself inside of my brain and will probably persist in a diminished form forever, and it's sometimes more alluring because I have an imbalance in neurotransmitters that's causing certain types of cognition to become more compelling. Okay, cool. I know all that. I keep it forefront in my consciousness. And so the arising of this thought just gives me a piece of information. Like if suicidal ideation is popping up a little bit more frequently, oh, okay, I'm probably depressed. Okay, I should make sure to, you know, pull up my little list of self-care routines and make sure that I'm taking care of, you know, getting my vitamins, drinking enough coffee, getting high quality sleep, all of these things that will allow the cycle of depression to just complete itself. You know, my neurotransmitters are out of whack, but eventually they come back into sync. And I've noticed that there are a bunch of things that I can do to reduce the period of time where I'm completely out of sorts at the bottom of depression. And so now those thoughts that in my young adulthood were so distressing because they said something terrible about me, that I had something, you know, something terrible lodged in my mind. It's like, no, actually, they don't say anything other than the fact that my neurotransmitters are out of whack. Thanks for the notice. Let me go do the self-care. So it can change pretty markedly in my experience over time. I think, you know, I've only ever had my experience. My struggle is depression, and probably ADHD. One day I'll navigate enough forms to get assessed for that, but thus far all of my attempts have run into my basic unwillingness to continue focusing on filling out paperwork. But other people have other challenges, and my understanding is that there are some mental health issues that can cause really, really difficult to break loops of repetitive, unpleasant, unhelpful, unfortunate cognition, and that you know is one of the places where the label of intrusive thoughts is really helpful to give people grounding to think about that sort of thing. And so I don't want to trivialize that. I don't want to suggest that, you know, if you're practicing meditation and working on directing your attention and you don't experience that diminution to the extent that I have, I'm not saying that you're a bad meditator or anything like that. And, you know, it did take a lot of work and a lot of time for me to reach a place where here comes the thought that says you should kill yourself. And I go, oh, thanks for the heads up. I'm going to go do self-care, take my vitamins. You know, building that relationship takes time, and really internalizing the fact that a thought can exist inside of your mind and not be about you and not say anything about you other than you had some history of encountering this kind of cognition at a point when you didn't have this skills, tools, knowledge, capability to say, oh, don't want that in here. And it lodged itself in there, and now it's just going to keep repeating forever. So to sum up, all thoughts are intrusive. they don't actually mean anything about you. The thoughts that happen to arise in your brain because of a whole complex interaction of your brain's natural tendency to pay attention to certain types of cognition and a whole history of information being loaded up into your mind at a time when you didn't have any say in the matter. After you've been made aware of the fact that thoughts happen and that your role is to cultivate those that take care of you and to direct your attention away from those that don't take care of you or actively harm you, the persistence of certain types of unpleasant, unhelpful thoughts can be instructive to you, either about changes in your mental state or the effectiveness of your practice. But having a bad thought does not mean you're a bad person. And if you can keep that in mind when bad thoughts are doing their thing, and find a way to channel your attention towards the sorts of thoughts that you have through your concerted efforts documented take care of you, you're going to have a better time and be a happier human being.